to start recording. There we go. Yeah. Great. And then I'm going to pull up our presentation for tonight. And hopefully everybody can see that. Let me make sure you can hear my sound for a video that we'll play later. And yeah, so that is us. We are the development team of CWS Lancaster, and I'm going to pass it off to Andrew.
All righty. Okay, are we all buckled in? Yeah, here we go. So, yeah, the agenda for this evening, there's several things that we're going to go over that are required orientation to become a volunteer with CWS. You can see some of those things listed here. We are going to go over a little bit about who refugees are and how do they arrive. I think it's important to understand a little bit of the process in which a lot of families and individuals have to go through before they arrive to our Lancaster community. Yeah, and so then we'll go over a little bit about what CWS programs are, and then specifically, you know, the role that you all will play as community volunteers. And then we will go over a little bit of, you know, how things have transpired for us, you know, since COVID started as well. Just a little bit about CWS Global. It was founded in 1946 as really an ecumenical movement amongst a variety of different church denominations after World War II. It was established as this idea behind actually working with post-World War II disaster relief in Europe, especially. There was this idea amongst the leaders of various denominations that, you know, what they could do alone was one thing, but what they could do together would be much greater. So they came together and formed Church World Service. And it has evolved over the years, over the decades, and is now, you know, a mission to end hunger, promote peace and justice. It is supported by 37 member communions or, you know, denominations from around the world. Program areas of focus are food, water, disaster response and recovery, and specifically for the CWS Lancaster office, assisting refugees and the vulnerable, and they are currently active in more than 30 countries. Just a little bit of a top-down view. There is CWS Global, which has corporate offices in New York. There's one in DC and Elkhart, Indiana. Yeah, so there's that. Along with a variety of sub offices, which Lancaster is one, and CWS is one of 9 contracted refugee resettlement agencies that work specifically with various government agencies in the refugee resettlement program. So if a person or a family has received refugee status through that program to come to the United States, they will be resettled through one of these 9 agencies. So who are refugees? Who are they and how do they arrive to our community? And we are going to try and attempt, I think, through Zoom, a video for you.
لما كانوا عم يقصفوا كان في يجي كتير صوت تبع لما كانوا يقصفوا كان يجي صوت يعني كان بيخوف.
Yo no me imaginé que hubiera tanta gente saliendo del país.
لقد فقدت منزلي، فقدت سعادة عيالي وسعادتي.
Each of these voices is unique, but their experience is shared with 1% of the people on this planet. For the first time, 1% of humanity is now uprooted, forced to flee their homes in what for many becomes a long and harrowing search for safety. Today, we count 79.5 million people who are now displaced, wrenched from their homes by violence, persecution, conflict, and the violation of human rights. This is nearly twice as many as a decade ago, according to statistics compiled by the UN Refugee Agency from 2010 to 2019. 26 million of them are refugees, but the majority of those forced to flee are still living inside their own countries. The scale of the numbers defies our imagination. Consider this: 100 million people have been displaced in the past decade. The uprooted are victims of a world in conflict, and they pay an incalculable cost.
Bebe la parabli stara panganda ti via pa sama nimba me ya nyabu kudo sitba optaure.
Renata fled an attack on her village in Burkina Faso, where close to 500,000 people fled due to insecurity in 2019 alone. Mujtaba from Afghanistan found safety in Greece, but brought the trauma of war with him.
بعد فکر یه جوری بود که من حتی شبا میخوابیدم خواب میدیدم، کابوس میدیدم، استرس خیلی داشتم.
أنا عمري 11 بس بحس حالي عمري 100 إنه حسب الشيء الحال اللي نحن فيها، يعني بدي أعين أهلي، بدي أعين أخواتي، يعني ما لهم غيري يعني كبيرة.
Namat is from Syria, which 9 years into its war is still the world's biggest displacement crisis. In fact, 5 countries account for 2/3 of people displaced across borders: Syria, Venezuela, Afghanistan, South Sudan, and Myanmar. And half of them are children. Displaced children often lack access to education. They are exposed to violence and exploitation, and too many face dangers alone. In 2019, UNHCR counted more than 150,000 child refugees who were unaccompanied by or separated from their families. Africa's Sahel region is a growing hotspot as violence spreads from Mali to Niger, Burkina Faso, and beyond. 80% of the forcibly displaced reside in countries grappling with food insecurity and the extremes of climate change. More hardship awaits them. So why do the numbers keep going up? For those fleeing conflict and persecution, options to rebuild their lives are limited. Opportunities for resettlement in another country fall far short of needs, while fewer refugees are able to return home safely. Tens of millions of people remain in exile for years on end, in countries and communities that are often poor and struggling themselves. Even so, there is hope. We are joining forces to respond to refugee crises together, governments alongside aid groups, the private sector and civil society, and with refugees themselves. We need to bolster inclusion in work and schools. And we must protect asylum, as it protects the most fragile among us.
I feel like I go back home. Yes, this is my home because I feel this is my home.
In a world grappling with a global health pandemic, we are reminded of how interconnected we are, that the safety of one is linked to the safety of us all. It is a time for solidarity, still, now, and more than ever before.
So the video, I think, touched on a little bit about who specifically refugees are. In 1951, the United Nations Convention on Refugees did their best to try and define exactly who refugees are, and it has been a definition that has stuck for the last number of generations, really. And that is, the refugees have been defined as people who flee their country because of a well-founded fear of persecution based on their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group and who are unable or unwilling to return home. Go to the next one. The video also did mention specifically about displaced people on a global scale. Yes, the numbers are undoubtedly overwhelming. It's hard to wrap our minds around this idea of 79.5 million displaced people, to which hovering around a third of which are refugees. The remaining would be, classified as asylum seekers, which would be a very, different category. Internally displaced persons who have fled their home but have not fled their country of origin. So there's a variety of different categorizations that people who have been displaced fall under, and about a third of them are refugees around the world. So fleeing to safety. After fleeing their homeland, refugees essentially have three options. Option one is to return to their home country when their homeland is deemed safe. As you can imagine, this is rarely, if ever, a very viable option. As the video alluded to, the war in Syria, for example, actually essentially started, a lot of historians look back and say it started with the Arab Spring back in 2011. So we're going on well over a decade that Syria has been engulfed in this civil war. And I don't think anyone would say that Syria is safe enough to return home. So the other options become settling to the country in which they fled. Now, this is typically a country that borders their country of origin. So for people who, when there was a mass exodus out of Syria, a lot of people would have resettled in places like Jordan or Egypt. A lot of the folks that we welcome originally from Somalia would actually have fled to Kenya and maybe even lived in Kenya for a number of decades in refugee camps. And so for a small minority, the third option becomes a reality, and that's resettling permanently into a third country, which the United States is typically one of those countries. And it is important to know that the typical time spent in displacement for families before they arrive to our Lancaster community is 17 to 25 years. One of the more stark anecdotes I remember ever hearing, it was from a gentleman, I don't even remember his name, unfortunately, but he was a young man from Somalia. He had to be in his mid-20s. And I remember he told me this story about when he moved to Dadaab refugee camp in Kenya. He was greeted by the UN High Commissioner of Refugees, the sub-organization within the UN that processes refugee claims, and they gave him a baby tree. And he was maybe about 10 years old at the time, I think. And he looked at the UN agent and asked why they were giving them a tree, because what would they do with a tree? He felt like they weren't going to be there that long. And I remember he told me that they were climbing that tree by the time that they actually got the word that they were going to be resettled in the United States. So it was I think it was a good 20 years that they were there. The United States Refugee Admissions Program is actually a set ceiling of admissions. It's a number of individuals that are determined to get resettled in the United States, and that is determined every fiscal year by the President of the United States. And so for a number of decades, really, that has been certainly sort of a bipartisan issue on how many to admit. Fortunately, we have been told that for fiscal year of 2022, which will begin in October, we have the ability, I think, and the capacity and possibility of resettling of having that refugee ceiling be the highest that it's been in well over 25 years. This is actually the same numbers in a lovely graph form for those of you who like graphs. Oh. Yeah, and this is actually, I find this fascinating. This is based off of the folks that we saw arrive actually in the year 2020, which obviously was a very bizarre year to begin with, but this just kind of goes over some of the demographic makeup of the countries of origin that we saw come through to our community for the last number of years. The most represented country of origin, I guess is the best way to put it, have been coming from the Democratic Republic of Congo. And that was mostly due to federal policy that was limiting other populations to be able to resettle here. Now with a lot of those restrictions lifted, we anticipate being able to see more clients and folks coming from various other parts of the world as well. And I think it's important to note and sort of step back and really reflect on this idea that we are facing the world's worst refugee crisis in recorded history. And even though it's easy to get dismayed by this undeniable fact that less than 1% of the world's refugee population actually do get resettled into a third country, I think it's also important to know or to reflect and even think about the idea that that's still 1% is still a very large number. To the families and individuals that we get to help resettle into our community, it does become a life-saving option. And we hope that the United States will sort of keep with its historical track of being a leader in refugee protection. The lovely refugee resettlement process is actually rather convoluted, that really involves a multitude of steps. And whenever I look at this chart, I actually think about the word, I guess, that I have been told. Obviously, I'm not a refugee myself, but every refugee friend that I have, when I ask them, what is the one word that would describe their experience, it is to wait. That is certainly the spirit behind in which they go through this entire process. That involves a number of interviews, medical examinations, background checks, and a lot of waiting, approvals and denials, and more interviews. And sometimes it includes, medical checks to expire if they're not able to actually get on a plane in a certain amount of time. So it can be a very long and complicated process. It is very important to note, and actually when I get to my slide where I'm supposed to stop, just tell me, because these are not numbered on my screen. So it is important to know, and I think this actually does combat a little bit of misconceptions about specifically who refugees are. And in every one of these orientations, I emphatically make sure I reiterate that refugees in the United States are legal permanent residents who do receive green cards after 1 year. They are eligible for their citizenship at 5 years from their date of arrival, and they are eligible to work and become contributing members of our communities starting on the first day of their arrival in the United States. Is that where I'm supposed to stop? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So I can talk a little bit more about the programs and services that we provide within the Church World Service Lancaster office. So we'll look through those a little bit together. So Church World Service Lancaster has 4 main programs totaling up to 5 years of service and support for refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers. So those are different terms that you've heard being referenced throughout the orientation so far. And they do have some very specific meanings and legal definitions associated with them. And I do think sometimes they can be confusing. So we can talk just really briefly before we move into this. Asylum seekers, that's a term that's being used a lot these days, especially in regards to the southern border of the United States. I think it's important to recognize that asylum seekers are attempting to go through the same process as refugees. They just have not been formally recognized as refugees yet. So asylum seekers are fleeing their home countries for a variety of reasons, many of which are the same reasons as folks who are legally designated as refugees. So that's what the term asylum seeker means. Folks have a legal right to seek asylum in the United States. And so they are, yes, looking to show evidence of the persecution or the reasons for fleeing and to ultimately be designated as a refugee. There are a variety of terms associated with immigration and migration. And so recognizing that with Church World Service, we use the terms undocumented or documented. No human being is illegal, right? And so thinking about immigrants that our office works with through our Immigration Legal Services Department may be in a variety of statuses, mixed statuses within their families. And then another term that you might have heard Andrew mention was sort of internally displaced peoples. And again, those are folks who have fled their homes for a variety of reasons, but have not yet crossed national or international borders. So those are some of the terms that you might hear both in sort of like the national zeitgeist in conversations around refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers, and then also in our work. So the 4 main programs that we provide: resettlement and placement services, intensive case management and navigation. We also have employment services and our immigration legal services program. So we'll talk about each of those a little bit more in depth. So our resettlement program is one that many of you, especially those of you who are a part of a welcome team, will be supporting. So as one of the 9 refugee resettlement agencies, our office partners with the US government to resettle arriving refugees into the Lancaster community. As part of that relationship with the US government, we have a very specific list of priorities and activities that must be completed within the first 90 to 180 days of arrival, depending on the kind of program a newly resettling neighbor might be enrolled into. So within those first 90 to 180 days, the goal is really to have new neighbors and clients move on a path towards financial self-sufficiency, with obviously an ultimate goal of really integration and engagement in the broader community. So to empower new refugees, newly resettled refugees on that path, our office works closely with individual volunteers and welcome teams to provide housing, furniture, clothing, to welcome new families at the airport. Within those first 30 days in particular, there are a number of activities that we work through with families, transportation to initial medical appointments, enrolling folks and getting their social security card, enrolling kids in the local school district, building those connections to begin to provide English as a second language. We'll talk in a minute about our employment services program, but partnering with that program to find initial employment with a goal of being able to build career pathways over time. We also provide cultural orientation to new neighbors, both in the first week and actually, honestly, within the first couple of days in terms of an initial housing orientation, how to navigate their new apartment or house, What are the things that they're seeing in their apartment? How do they utilize them? Cultural orientation and employment orientation, thinking about cultural norms, workplace expectations, and then additional orientations at that 90-day date. Within our resettlement program, we also have something called our match grant program. Our matching grant program helps refugees and other Office of Refugee Resettlement eligible populations work to find jobs quickly, with the goal for folks to become financially independent in 4 to 6 months after arriving in the United States without accessing US cash assistance programs. So I don't know if these numbers feel, I don't know what's the word I'm looking for, like negatively impressive, overwhelming. Thinking about financial independence within 4 to 6 months after arriving to the United States is really a big task. And that's why our partnerships with groups and individuals like each of you are so important in being able to provide, additional support and comfort and friendship to folks as they begin new lives here in the United States, and work to navigate these systems that many of us, take for granted, and work on our English skills. So each of you play a really important role in helping our newest neighbors, again, move from not only just financial independence, but really feeling part and parcel of the Lancaster community. We can quickly watch a video from Evie Long. Many of you will get the opportunity to meet Evie over the next little while as you continue to partner with our office, but she's our resettlement supervisor.
Hi, my name's Evie Long, and I'm the resettlement supervisor for Church World Service. I supervise 2 programs, Reception and Placement, or RMP as we call for short, and the Match Grant program. The Reception and Placement program is a 3-month program which is contracted through the US government. We receive new arrivals which are slated to be resettled in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and we serve them for those 3 months. We start by securing housing before they arrive, and then continue to help them with core services, which include initial medical appointments, securing Social Security applications, school enrollment for children, welfare benefit applications, and referrals to job and ESL programs, along with much, much more. The second program, the Match Grant program, is primarily an employment-based program for work-eligible adults. It focuses especially on employment and job readiness training, and it also provides an additional 3 months of case management and some extra financial help for those families that need it. One of the reasons why our programs are so important, a couple of reasons, right? One, for our own community. We would not have the diverse and rich refugee community that we do have in Lancaster without resettlement programs like this. We also would see broken up families that are separated. Resettlement programs means families can come and be reunited in Lancaster. Without resettlement services here, families would either be relocated elsewhere or wouldn't even get a chance to come. And it provides a home to hundreds of refugees that otherwise wouldn't have a chance to come. One of my favorite things about my job is just definitely the mentorship aspect of it. Walking alongside families when they first arrive, seeing them struggle and then seeing them thrive, learning English, learning the complicated systems that are in the United States. It's a really neat thing to, meet with a kid who arrived 2 years ago from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and then 2 years later I see them and they greet me and they're speaking to me in fluent English, and they say, Evie, I want to volunteer for CWS, I want to interpret. This is a high schooler. So it's just so cool to see these communities that just want to give back then. And I'm just so proud of our clients and the community we serve, and everything that comes with, being a welcoming place.
So in addition to our resettlement services that, again, have that really specific time delineated sort of availability of support, we also are able to provide intensive case management and navigation for up to 5 years of services. So again, recognizing that idea of sort of financial independence and full integration within 3 to 4 months is a pretty tall order. Our intensive case management and navigation services are able to provide some additional sort of wraparound care for folks that may need it, especially folks with some health or mental health needs. Our cultural navigator program works with clients, almost indefinitely to connect them to local services. So helping folks navigate existing systems and existing resources here in Lancaster. We were recently awarded some funds for our Good Job, Happy Family program that's really looking at holistic family support services, especially recognizing how important it is for parents to have feelings of independence and integration in ensuring success for children. So the Good Job, Happy Family program works really closely and provides support and empowerment and agency to families as they build their own sort of integration plans, goal plans, and then work together with CWS staff to achieve those goals. Our employment program assists clients in assessing vocational background skills and work experience in order to help them find a work placement. It's important to realize that new neighbors come to our community with a wide variety of skill sets. There may be some new neighbors who have not completed formal education, and other new neighbors who may have been doctors and lawyers and higher education administrators, for example, in their home countries. And so our employment program works closely with clients to understand sort of past educational and vocational history, understand any possibilities for certification or recertification. Pennsylvania is actually one of the hardest states to have some recertification in around healthcare, for example. So we've worked with clients who were doctors in their home countries and begin their medical careers here in the United States as CNAs as they continue the process of getting recertified or getting additional education. So our employment specialists work closely with clients and are able to provide up to 5 years of return service. So working with clients for that initial employment and continuing to be able to work with clients as they build their own career pathways. We assist clients in preparing resumes, in providing orientation to typical US work-based environments, supporting transportation and interpretation. We've built a strong network with area employers who are eager to hire new neighbors and enjoy working closely with them. Some of those employers also partner with us to provide vocational English as a second language instruction there at the workplace, or partner with us or with other organizations within Lancaster City to support transportation. We know that can be one of the biggest needs that clients have in initial resettlement and moving to Lancaster, especially as it relates to employment. You can see here some of the industries that employ clients, recognizing that while many new clients live here in Lancaster City, a lot of employment takes place out of the city, especially in food manufacturing and hospitality, agriculture, warehouse. So support that volunteers provide, that welcome teams provide, that employers and workplaces themselves are able to provide in helping new clients sort of get from initial placement in Lancaster to be able to travel to their workplaces is one of the biggest needs that we have. We also, through our office, provide immigration legal services, and our office is recognized by the Executive Office for Immigration Review of the U.S. Department of Justice, and we have a number of staff members who are accredited to represent clients before USCIS courts. So through this program, we're able to support Lancaster residents with applications for permanent residence, sort of green cards, again, recognizing that refugees are eligible for their green cards within 1 year of arrival. We provide citizenship assistance, naturalization support, renewal of green cards, work permits, petitions for relatives for family reunification, travel documents, and representation and counseling for unaccompanied minors. So these are just some examples of our clients and the locations that folks might have come from over the last few years. In addition to sort of those core program services, our office also has a few other areas of work, including the sort of community engagement and outreach team. So me, Haley, and Andrew. We also have a refugee community organizer who works really closely with immigrant and refugee leaders in ensuring access and equity and supporting client communities as they organize and engage in sort of local government or in partnerships with other service providers in the area. So this work is really a public-private partnership, and we wouldn't be able to do this work without sort of our, obviously, government contracts, the support that local service providers give to new clients, and then again, the work from each of you as individual volunteers and welcome teams. Haley, I'll let you take this over.
Sure. Yeah, so after all of that, after we've explained the backgrounding on refugees and kind of the work that our office does locally, you're probably asking, okay, so where do we all come in? And you guys are our community, and we are very, very grateful for the work of our local community. And we honestly would not be able to welcome refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers in the same way that we do without living in such a welcoming community. So what is the role of communities? Why is it so important? So we have volunteers like yourselves that support our clients. And through that, we're able to educate on these issues. As Rachel was talking about, even the definitions of all of these categories can be confusing. And so how can we educate our local community to understand who their neighbors are and not just put a number behind those statistics, but just have, a face that connects to that. So we're able to do, we've even through COVID been able to do some Zoom presentations for elementary students all the way up to college and beyond. We're talking about even doing some presentations at some local retirement communities. So that's really important to us and is a huge part of what we do. Advocacy, those numbers that Andrew had shared earlier, that is a presidential determination, how many refugees are coming into the United States every single year. And so it is very important that we are advocating that these numbers remain high and that we remain historically the leader in refugee resettlement. And so, as Rachel mentioned, we have somebody on our staff who is a refugee community organizer, and he also connects with our office in Washington, D.C., and we're continually in contact with them as we are aware of different policies and things that need to be passed. And so you might see some of those things come up through emails, and that is a huge support of our community, calling local Congress, members of Congress, and things like that when there are policies and things that are relating to the populations that we work with. And then, of course, donations, not just monetarily, but also in-kind donations, especially as it pertains to welcome teams. I'm sure you guys will be participating in donations in this way as far as housing setups go and things like that. But every once in a while, we'll have a donation ask that goes out. Right now, one of our most current donation asks is actually for Uber gift cards. We're still in this weird transition phase where typically we have volunteers helping to transport clients. And so our policies right now are still following COVID guidelines. And so we're in the middle there where a lot of our clients are needing to be transported to appointments and things. And right now our transportation is Uber. So we have an Amazon wish list that goes directly to our office, and those donations go right to clients. So that is another way that we have community support. And so kind of on the same lines as the public-private partnership, this is kind of our overview of how we get clients from arrival. They come to the airport their feet are on the ground, their first time in the United States. How do we integrate them into the Lancaster community? And so over there on the left side, you'll see our core services. So that's like what Rachel talked about, all of our programs that we offer: resettlement and placement, intensive case management, employment services. And these are essentially what our office can offer 9 to 5, and the things that we have funding for. And then over there on the right side is how we continue to make it a whole more holistic experience for clients. And that's where volunteers like yourselves come in, that just help with those extra things that are also very important. Getting involved in the local community in many different ways, getting, we help with students to get enrolled in school, and community members can come alongside and then encourage the students to also get involved in extracurricular activities, and then also be the community members that are there to support them at a sporting event or at something that they might be involved in. And so that's kind of how we work hand in hand to create a really holistic approach to the work that we do. And this is, again, just our integration framework is all so important. It's not just the core services, but it's beyond. So our values are strength-based and client-centered approach. So everything that we do is about the client. And we essentially want all of these things. You can read down here: community belonging, economic well-being, all the way down, security and stability. All these things are incredibly important to have families come, and they're coming. So our framework is from welcome. So that's the beginning there, welcoming right from the get-go, from the airport pickup. And then we go into this phase of self-reliance. So the family is getting on their feet, they're getting employed, the kids are getting enrolled in school, and we're feeling like we're being integrated into the community. And ultimately, we want families to thrive. And so that's our framework, and that is the goal that we ultimately have. And that is the piece in which volunteers and community members play such an important role. This is an older slide, and hopefully we're starting to see a shift out of COVID, but the community, even in the midst, maybe even more so in the midst of a global pandemic, just really rose up and supported the clients. We had a bit of a surge of clients right before COVID, and then everything kind of stopped. And so we needed to take care of those clients. Back in March of 2020, many of them had to quarantine and things like that upon arrival. And so we had volunteers who were dropping off groceries and toiletry kits to clients who weren't able to get outside of the home upon arrival. Virtual English as a second language was happening, and this is another plug for our virtual event on Thursday, but you'll get to hear from some of our two of our volunteers of the year were a huge part of this virtual English as a second language, really bringing that up off the ground and getting integration still happening amidst a very odd time and time that it was hard, especially with folks that don't have English as their first language. These are just some more pictures of the different virtual events that we've done, some of the drop-offs that happened. And thankfully it's getting warmer out, and we're able to meet outside, and things are going to look a little bit more back to normal. But this is kind of what it's looked like since COVID-19. And so the next couple slides are kind of getting into the nitty-gritty of things. What does it look like as a volunteer? What are some of our policies? So cultural sensitivity and expectations. Cultural sensitivity is extremely important. It is going to be also very unique depending on where the client that you'll be working with is from. So as Andrew talked about, our clients come from many places all over the world. Persecution, unfortunately, can happen to anybody around the world. It does not discriminate. And so we do experience getting to meet and welcome families and individuals from all over the world. And so cultural backgrounds are going to vary, language backgrounds are going to vary, but we do have some policies that kind of are overarching for all clients. So first one is religion and proselytizing. We ask that you do not proselytize with clients especially as the refugee definition goes, that is one of the reasons that clients could be or could have been persecuted from their home country. So being sensitive there and understanding that there is and could be some trauma that is related to that, and just being respectful of individuals' backgrounds. Time, I'm sure if any of you have any experience traveling or experiencing other cultures, the United States has a very specific way of having time-based, just a time-based society, time-based culture. In other countries, this is not necessarily the case. And so if you are to take a client to an appointment, go early. You'll learn this quickly with clients. A lot of them are adjusting to our schedules and understanding that an appointment, if it's at 6 p.m., you need to be there probably at 5:45, not after 6 p.m. And so that is something that we work with our clients through cultural orientation, but this is something just to understand that they could be experiencing and understanding. Gender roles, this again is something that is different culturally in different situations, and just understanding, again, these are all things that we do go through with our clients through cultural orientation, but just understanding and respecting that there might be different relationships there. If you go to visit with a family, there might have to be if there's a woman present, you might have to have another woman present. If you are not to be alone with the opposite gender, those kinds of things. Again, different in different cultures, and things that we can go over more specifically when you are matched with a specific person from a specific location. LGBTQ, again, that's another one of those reasons that people can be persecuted. That is falls under the participation in a particular social group. One of those could be, that also could be gender, but it could also be LGBTQ affiliation. And so just being sensitive to that, as you would to anybody, but also specifically to clients who have most definitely experienced, can have experienced trauma. For that reason, all of our clients have experienced trauma in different ways, but this could be one of the reasons. Respect and authority. This is, again, another thing we go through in cultural orientation, but understanding different relationships with authority in other countries, corruption that happens, and things like that. And so understanding, we typically have a police officer or a firefighter come to our cultural orientation so that clients can understand the relationship there. And we do have a relationship with local law enforcement, and they do understand sometimes that there's a language barrier and things like that with clients. Education, wealth, and status. Rachel touched on this a little bit when she talked about our employment program, but again, our clients come from a broad span of backgrounds. And so we have clients sometimes who have their PhD. They could have been a teacher, a doctor previously in their home country, and or have come from a wide variety of wealth and societal status backgrounds. And so just understanding that, and this is something that is, I think, ingrained in many of us, is not, we don't want to just make assumptions because somebody does not have English as their first language. And sometimes that's hard when you are communicating with someone, but just understanding that when there is that language barrier, there could also be a large amount of knowledge and wealth that can be gained from these individuals who have a broad array of backgrounds. And as has been mentioned before, past experiences and trauma, all clients have experienced trauma of some kind if they're being resettled into the United States. So just understanding that there's sensitivities there. Sometimes it takes longer to adapt, and we just need to be aware of that. And also just understanding that we understand that as an office. And if you ever have any questions about these things and trauma-informed care and things like that, we are more than happy to talk about it and offer support. Language awareness, I touched on this a little bit. These are all just little tidbits on how we can continue to create a welcoming space for clients. So speaking clearly, not louder. If you don't understand, try using a different way of explaining things. Everybody is going to have a different experience and different strengths in their language ability. You can absolutely use Google Translate and things like that. Dictionaries. One of the most commonly used tools for English as a second language learners and tutors is actually sticky notes. So taking a pack of sticky notes and sticking them on items around the household is really helpful. So on the refrigerator, write refrigerator, on the mirror, write mirror, so that they can start to see things and kind of associate them, word association. And just being patient, understanding that many clients speak not just one language, but they might speak many languages, and that learning a new language is not an easy feat. And it's very important that clients do continue to do this work, but just understanding that clients might be at many different levels when it comes to language. Boundaries and safety. Ultimately, trust your gut as far as it goes with just being with clients and being in Lancaster City. Don't do things you wouldn't do just naturally. So don't leave valuables visible in your parked car, lock your car, abide by PA motor safety laws. This is really important. All clients who have children that are legally need a car seat will receive a car seat upon their arrival. So if that doesn't seem accessible to you, you need to ask the family for it. They'll have it if you are transporting clients. My mom actually is a volunteer, and she at this point just has a car seat in her car because she was tired of doing switch outs with the family that she's volunteering with. So just understanding that is important, and we definitely follow those safety laws, as well as seatbelts. Just be the example. Motor safety laws are different in other countries. And so just reminding clients from the first day that you ever were to drive them somewhere that they need to have their seatbelt on is important. Again, number of passengers, just following the law there. If you are to give a gift or money, always just checking in with CWS is the best way to go with that. We might be having a situation where we're working on a budgeting plan or something with families, and we want to make sure that that's being able to be followed. And a lot of the time, a gift is very welcome, but just checking in with us is always great. And hand out your contact info at your discretion. A lot of our clients use WhatsApp, and you are free to share your phone number with them if that's something that you are comfortable with. And like I said before, always just reporting back to CWS. My favorite thing is getting emails, just updates from volunteers, even if it's, paragraphs long. I enjoy reading them and sharing them with case managers. So that's a great update for us when we can hear from volunteers what's going on with clients. So that's really helpful. And we've said this before throughout our presentation, but empowerment is really our main goal. We don't want to give a handout. We want to help and give a hand up to clients. And so just basic, we want to get clients to be self-sufficient. And so how can we do this in the least intrusive way? One example is mail. Mail can be a very tricky thing that we kind of take for granted, how much junk mail we might get in the mail. And we can easily, with our cultural backgrounding, be able to sift through that and understand what's important, what is junk, what can be thrown out. And so this can be, and is something that we go through with clients during cultural orientation, but can be something that's a little tricky. And so instead of every time that you go to an individual's or a family's home, going through and just sifting it for them and being done with it, maybe taking the time to sit down, and sometimes these things take a little bit more time, sitting down with the family and explaining, okay, this is junk and this is why, and that kind of thing. In the long run, that's empowerment. And that is something that it might take a couple of times, but over time, then the family themselves will be able to do that, and they won't be reliant on you as a volunteer. And so Refugees are individuals. They have autonomy. Sometimes they might make a decision that you don't understand or you don't agree with, but they are an individual. Their lives, decisions, personal information, that is theirs and theirs alone. And so just understanding that even when maybe we don't understand, you can offer your best advice, but ultimately they get to make their own decisions. And they are, like we said, legal permanent residents of the United States, just like you and me, since the day that they arrive. And this is just more examples of the helping versus empowering. So there's the male example, or teaching the bus system or showing walking routes instead of becoming an Uber driver. We don't want that happening. Every once in a while, it is helpful to transport clients to medical appointments and things like that. But long-term, we want them to be able to get to where they need to go on their own. Confidentiality, you have all filled out media waivers at this point, and that is just a part of our orientation. Social media permissions, this again, make sure you talk to families before you post any pictures of them. Some might want their identity to be more concealed here in the United States as they are fleeing persecution. So each is a case-by-case basis. Some families might want to automatically be friends with you on Facebook and be posting all the time. It just depends on the individual that you are working with. And social security numbers, addresses, these kinds of things that you might have access to as you are a trusted individual in the refugee's life. Those are all obviously confidential, and we just ask that you keep those things safe. So the warmth of welcome, this is kind of exciting because every time I've shown this slide in the past, we haven't been able to do any of these things, but when life goes back to normal, yada, yada, maybe we can do it. Well, finally now I think we can do some of these things. So visiting a local park with family. One of the things that was able to happen during COVID was visiting the local library. I had volunteers who got to take families to get their library card. Creating a garden together, get creative, find out what your interests, your passions are, what the family's passions are, and what the overlap is, and maybe do some of these things together. Food is a huge, huge connecting point. And so that's something I'm sure you'll all get to enjoy at some point, trying different cultural foods and things like that. And these are the really fun things about volunteering with people from around the world. So this is talking about just that integration framework that we spoke about before, going from welcome. So over there on the left, that's a welcome team. It's a little blurry, but that's a welcome team welcoming a family. And then in the middle there, self-reliance, so job placement, getting really involved in the community, and then ultimately thriving there on the right side. That's Mustafa Noor. If you are familiar with him, he is our most famous refugee, former refugee, I would say, in Lancaster County. He owns his own business now, and he owns multiple businesses. One of them being a restaurant on the top of Telus 360 in Lancaster City. So he's really, really great and a perfect example of what we are ultimately striving for. So one last video here.
It's work. It's home. But thanks to you, Church World Service can go beyond finding a home for people displaced by tragedy. We find jobs, build community, foster safety, and show welcome. Thanks to you, we've welcomed refugees from 27 countries throughout the years, offering 5 years of service and beyond. We provide hope and home to refugees, immigrants, evacuees from Puerto Rico, DACA recipients, and asylum seekers. These are people who contribute to our economy, who become part of our workforce, who become self-sufficient and can raise their families.
Thanks to you, I'm finding my home.
Thanks to you, I'm finding my peace.
Thanks to you, I'm finding my community again.
Thanks to you, I have a better future.
Thanks to you, I see my kids' future here.
Thank you, Lancaster, for being a place of welcome, a place for people from all over the world to call home. Thank you for supporting Church World Services work in bringing together individuals, businesses, and community members. Because it's more than us. We need you, so they can rebuild their lives and feel the welcoming embrace of this community.
Thanks to you, I'm finding my peace here. Sorry. That's Mama will start from the beginning.
So that's always, we like ending on that video, as you know, the first video that we showed is pretty sobering and it's all true and those are the facts, but it's a beautiful thing that we're able to welcome refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers into our community. And you guys are a part of that, and we're so grateful. So what to expect from here, we have individual volunteers. So if you're an individual volunteer, you'll hear from me. And I had previously at this point sent, I think yesterday or the day before that, some of the documents, and I can resend those as well. There's just some volunteer orientation, proof of orientation things, and you can send those back to me. And for many of you, once you fill those out, then that's the last step, and we'll be able to get you volunteering from there. And also, basically the same goes for Andrew. For welcome team members, you'll hear from him and you guys can fill out those documents. I am the communications specialist, so I can't go without saying to follow us on all of our social media. You can find us at CWS Lancaster, and you can sign up for our newsletter on our website, and you'll automatically be added to that once you are an approved volunteer. So thank you so much for welcoming all of us to share with you guys today. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see all of your faces, but I'd just like to open it up to any questions that you might have for us